Joined with me on the stage, Jessica Leonard, who's Director of Corporate Affairs and Regulation at TalkTalk. TalkTalk is one of the UK's biggest telecoms and convergent media companies, 4 million customers. Hit the headlines in October last year, October 23rd, when it was revealed that up to 4 million customers had potentially had their data somehow hacked or stolen. In the days that followed, TalkTalk shares fell, falling 10% on the day, and that fall continued. However, as time went on and more details emerged, it emerged that actually only 157,000 customers were actually affected. Jess, when the attack happened, what was your first reaction?
Well, so the difficulty is at the beginning you don't know what the attack actually means. Mm-hmm. So you're never going to have a situation where you're given perfect information from minute one. So what we understood at the beginning was that there had been an attack on our systems. We didn't know how much data had been taken. We didn't know how much had been accessed across the whole estate, how many customers might be affected. So of course you know that there's been a serious problem, but actually you don't know at the beginning how bad it might be. The most important thing is that you notify the right authorities, that you start getting everyone in the company into an operational state where they can confront something of scale. And you know, that's your first sort of 24 hours really.
Sure. The initial headlines were maybe somewhat unkind. One newspaper in particular suggested all 4 million customers had been hacked and data taken. How did you respond to that in your role?
Well, they were terribly nice and retracted it a little while later. No, I mean, look, again, there is an asymmetry of information there. Yeah. So, you know, what you know as a company and what you're working with the police and your security experts on is not something that you can tell the whole country and nor the media. And the media, justifiably perhaps, you know, are extremely curious about something on this scale. So you do your best to get the correct information out there. And where things do get misreported, there are two things that you're considering. Of course, you're considering the reputation of the company. If you're in my job, that's your job to do that. But more importantly, what you're hoping is that you're getting accurate information out there so that customers can behave appropriately. So the reason that we went out as soon as we could and told all 4 million customers via the national media isn't because we wanted to make a big song and dance about it for the sake of it. It's because we knew that if we told those customers early, they would be able to protect themselves against scams should their data have gone missing. And of course that creates something of a sensation in the media because it is a large story. But you know, we absolutely maintain that if we hadn't have done that, customers would have just been vulnerable to criminals from the beginning.
You were only 6 weeks into the role at TalkTalk when the attack happened.
I was.
Call it a baptism of fire is probably an understatement. What sort of plans did you have in place for this, were this to happen? And obviously it did happen. What sort of plans? Presumably it was too early for you to sort of have a sort of drawn out communications plan and how you would respond, etc.
So, well, I think there's two elements to this. There's how prepared the business is, and then there's, you know, how good are your comms, and they are quite separate things. So TalkTalk is quite fortunate actually in, because we're a large telecoms company and we have responsibility for some nationally significant infrastructure, we actually work very closely with the government and particularly GCHQ on the 10 steps to cybersecurity. And so protecting that estate actually is something which, you know, you work with the government and you make sure that you are prepared to a degree. Yeah. Because of that relationship, we knew who to call at the beginning. Now, there are many companies that aren't at this scale or not in this industry where it wouldn't have been at all clear what the process was actually when this happens. Do you call the police? Do you call the National Crime Agency? Do you call in a SWAT team from BAE Systems? Do you know, what do you do? And that's actually a big gap in, I think, at the moment in the current framework. So we were actually quite well positioned, fortunately, for that. In terms of comms, again, I've got a very, very good team. And it's a large company, and as you'd expect, we have contingency planning. Yep. Had we specifically planned for a cyber attack? No, we had not. And I think there are probably a lot of companies across the country that have been very busy with their crisis comms since ours, doing exactly that exercise.
Yeah. In terms of the attack itself, I realise there's sort of criminal investigations going on. You can't say that much, but given what you now know, would you have sort of changed your response, that response coming out straight away saying, you know, up to 4 million customers could be affected? Would you have changed that if you knew what had actually happened?
So this is the question we get asked all the time. You know, would you have gone public? Yep. Because, you know, actually, yeah, I'll be really honest with you. As a comms person, my opinion is that if we'd have waited the 2.5 weeks it took to find out that it was only 4% of customers, we could have gotten away with that being a small column on page 24 of your newspaper, and the whole thing would have gone away. Would we go back and do that? Absolutely not. In fact, the biggest regret that we have throughout the entire thing is that we spent quite a significant chunk of time, a day in fact, discussing with the police whether we ought to go public at all. Now, we went public for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because we knew at the beginning that the entire estate could have been accessed, and that this meant potentially 4 million people's personal, sensitive financial data could have been taken. Did we want to be in a position in a month's time from there where we find out that it's all been taken, that we've then got to go and explain to our customers that we've known for a month that their bank details had been taken? And how many of those customers would have suffered financial loss or data theft of another kind in the meantime that we would have been responsible for as a company? Reputationally, that's not smart. Financially, that's not smart. So for us, it was very clear cut. The thing that I think we regret, actually, is this situation where we spent quite a long time discussing whether to go at all. And there's a reason for this. So obviously in this situation, you've got lots of different stakeholders with lots of different interests. So you've got, your investors, you've got your operations people trying to cope with what's happened, you've got what you must do for your customers, and then you've actually got this interesting situation with the authorities. So the police's job in this situation is to catch the crooks. So the guys that they send in actually at the moment are the hostage negotiation team, at which point you realise your life has actually become spooks. But they send in the hostage negotiation team, and you're faced with a situation where they say, don't tell people, because we need to catch the crooks. Don't tell people. And there's actually a massive carve-out from the legislation which impels you to actually report this. If it's part of an ongoing criminal investigation, you don't have to do it. We didn't have to do it. We didn't have to tell the ICO, we didn't have to tell our customers. Actually, obviously we took the decision that it was morally right, and for the long-term future of the business, we had to go out there and tell people. Many companies wouldn't make that decision, and if you've got the police telling you don't have to, interesting dilemma for a board.
Come back to the regulation in a moment. Did you, as a management team, as a board, consider paying the hackers and trying to brush over the whole thing?
So I think, first of all, when you receive a very credible-looking ransom note, and this is the first time that you've confronted something like this, you take advice. So you don't, this is not at the end of the day it has to be a judgment call, but you take advice from your security experts, from the police, and this is something which had obviously never happened to us before.
Yeah.
In the end, I think the conviction was, we've got to do the right thing for the customer. And if we had paid the ransom and we had tried to hush it up, customers would have been harmed, no doubt about it. And we know that these ransom notes are becoming increasingly common. We know that GCHQ says 9 out of 10 large UK businesses have been hacked. They deal with 200 large-scale successful data breaches every month. And yet ours is the one you remember. And that's because we came out and said something about it. If we'd have paid the ransom, like many companies undoubtedly do, we might have hushed it up. But we're just propagating a 21st century crime spree in the digital world. And that's where we do business. So not only would it have hurt customers, in the end it's going to hurt the digital economy. And we need that to be thriving, to survive as a company.
In terms of the regulatory requirements on reporting, they are somewhat blurred. Is that fair?
Yeah, so this is what we learned very quick. So there's 3 different elements of it. There's the Data Protection Act, and the Data Protection Act, no company has any legal obligation to report anything at all. And we were absolutely shocked when we discovered that, but that is in fact the case, no legal obligation. They suggest that in a friendly sort of, communicative way, you might wish to tell the ICO if you felt like it, if it was a serious breach, but they don't force you to do so. There's a regulation that sits underneath that, the PECR, which applies directly to telecoms. Now, we do have to tell the ICO, but we only have to consider telling our customers. And there are huge carve-outs from that, like the one I mentioned, where it's the subject of an ongoing criminal investigation. Then there's a third piece coming in, a European piece coming in 2018, which extends that PECR obligation to all companies. So all companies will be compelled to report. Problem with that one is massive carve-outs, huge. So obviously, given the way that we felt it was correct to behave in this situation, we are very, very passionate about the reporting requirements becoming more robust. I think it's in the interests of all the corporates sitting in this room to have a really long, hard think about when the public starts to understand the scale of what's going on here, which side of the fence do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the side of the companies that are protecting the public or the companies that are helping cover it up?
So it's fair to say if you were a large financial services organisation and had been in a similar situation, we might not know anything about this.
Correct. Or, another large online retailer where you buy your groceries, where you buy your sportswear, where you buy your home furnishings.
What's the reaction of other corporates been to TalkTalk since it happened? Have other companies come forward and said to you, this has happened to us and we covered it up or not covered it up, but just kept quiet about it, or you're very brave, or how do we respond to this? What's sort of reaction from the sort of corporate community been?
So, I mean, I have to say there was a real upswell of support, actually. My boss got a flurry of messages from, FTSE companies saying there, but by the grace of God, go we. And I think that there'd been a lot of serious conversations in a lot of boardrooms up and down the country after what happened to us.
Yeah.
I think the comms industry is very divided on this. Half of my peers are sitting there and saying, my God, let's make sure we're prepared so that no one ever found out if this happens to us. I think the smart half of the room, which are looking more long term at this, are thinking, okay, how can we be on the right side of this debate? How can we look at the reporting requirements? How can we make sure that we have the right communications in place to talk to customers? So I think there is a change coming as we start to realise the true scale of the problem. But obviously there's going to be parts of the corporate world which dig their heels in because they see the reputational and financial consequences of what TalkTalk did. Now, from our perspective, the business has made an extraordinarily speedy recovery, and we've got some very, very good data on why that's been. And one of the largest reasons is that we started from day one in a position of trust with our customers because we came out and we were open and honest with them. And we really believe that's what's given us the strong foundation for the business to actually come through this in the remarkable way that it has.
And from an investment perspective, how much have you said publicly how much you're spending on making sure this doesn't happen again?
So we don't release those figures. I think you'd be hard pressed to find any company which does reporting which releases those figures. It's not helpful in the opinion of the security services, and we agree. So we get asked lots of questions, what exactly are you doing to make the company safer? And I always, unfortunately, it's frustrating, but we have to reply the same thing. We're not here to write a toolkit for hackers. We're not going to tell you exactly what we're doing. We're not going to tell you exactly how much it costs, because our aim here is to keep customers' data safe.
Yeah.
But let's just say, look, even before this, we were significantly increasing security spend every year. One of the big learnings we've had is that it wasn't enough. It's never going to be enough. The higher walls we build, the longer ladders the criminals are going to bring. So we have to keep increasing it.
But it's fair to say profits did fall immediately after the attack.
They did.
And is that the result of investment or a result of customers?
So we had, interestingly actually, churn, we just found out last week, we did our end of year results last week. So churn, whilst of course you saw a spike back in October as you would expect, and you saw a spike in customers being unsatisfied, customers wanting to leave, it recovered incredibly quickly. So we just reported last week our lowest ever churn figure, and nearly our highest ever customer satisfaction figure. And trust in the company has actually gone up 17 points since before the cyber attack. So you wouldn't believe this. I mean, we've obviously been polling customer attitudes from day one. And the fact that trust and consideration has actually gone up so significantly, we've asked customers why. And they tell us it's three things. They say, first of all, because you were honest with us. Secondly, because we did a gesture, I don't know if you remember this, but we did a significant gesture to all 4 million customers after the cyber attack to say thank you for bearing with us. We gave them all a free upgrade of their services. So if you took TV, you get some free TV. Took mobile, you get a free mobile SIM for a year, etc. So that was the second reason. And then the third reason, quite simply, is because they expect us now to be safer. They think that we've been honest about the problem, and as a result, they think that we're now doing everything we can do to protect them, which is true.
And going forward, what will you do differently than you've done before, other than investing in cyber?
So I think the big thing for us is the understanding that this is actually not a technology issue. So I think one of the big problems with cyber is that it's very techy, and therefore it sort of sits in silos within companies. And what tends to happen is that the people who are doing the tech stuff have conversations with the board, which both sides think are being understood, but actually aren't. It's a different language. It's very, very technical. So I think the conversation that happens between a lot of CEOs and their security teams is the CEO will say, are we safe? And the security team will say, yes, we're safe. And what we've learned is that's completely the wrong question to ask and completely the wrong answer to give. Any CTO that tells a CEO, yes, we're safe, isn't doing their job properly. And any CEO that accepts that answer doesn't understand the problem. The question to ask is, what risks are we taking? And then it's not a technology decision, it's a risk decision, and it's a whole business decision. So at the very top level, that's how you have to start to look at it, is a decision which is a business decision. And then underneath that, you've got to make sure that across your whole company, you have a culture where that is understood and communicated well. So this is not something that can be managed in a box. Actually, every single person in the company, from operations to communications to HR to internal comms, everyone has got to understand why this matters to the whole business.
from an investor's perspective, this time last year, TalkTalk shares around the £4 mark. This morning we're about £2.60, £2.40 even. Clearly it's had an impact and a sentiment. It's not the only impact on the share price, but how do you get back to that, the level you were before? How do you sort of regain investors' trust and sort of prove to investors that TalkTalk means business?
Well, I think it's interesting actually, the history of the company I learned when I joined, we've been serially underestimated by the market. You know, we are the challenger brand, we behave in ways people don't expect, we produce results people don't expect. So I think if you remember our interim results, there were some extraordinary figures flying around about how badly we'd been affected. Yeah. And then we came out and surprised the market and shares jumped. We had the same thing last week with our full year results. Again, people were expecting doom and gloom. And actually the company is in growth, we've had our lowest ever churn, you know, the prospects look bright. So I think, you know, investors will be wise to keep watching. And do institutional investors, when you talk to them, are they worried? I know the ABI came out earlier this week saying you can't price in cyber risk, and they're very worried about sort of not just TalkTalk, but the whole market. Well, that's actually fascinating. So yeah, so the insurance industry has essentially come out with the same concerns we have about reporting requirements. So they've said it's impossible now to price in the risk of cyber because nobody is actually reporting when the incidents happen. So we know that they're happening because of the government figures. I mean, the national crime statistics went up for the first time last year in 20 years in the UK because for the first time we were including scams and cybercrime. Mm-hmm. But with companies not reporting, it's really difficult for that industry to actually understand how much this is going to cost everybody. But the government is working on total figures, cost to the economy of cybercrime, and I think those figures are going to be astronomical. As far as we, with our investors, we've proved that we will be transparent and honest about this. And they know that we are undergoing an absolutely extensive and robust program internally to make sure that we are doing everything we can. So I think that, you know, they should feel more assured by that than a company that says, oh, we've never had a hack, because I guarantee you that's not true. And in terms of what you hope the government does going forward on this, clearly sort of greater awareness is one area, but certainly talking to companies as well and making sure companies are sort of honest and upfront. Does government have a part to play there? So I think there's three things government can do. I mean, the most obvious one is they've got to take the fight to the criminals. You know, we have absolutely got to police the online world better than we are at the moment. You know, this is, imagine that the physical world 200 years ago, where you could get hijacked on the side of the road by a highwayman. This is the state now that the online world is in. We've got to civilize it, because otherwise we risk it becoming the Wild West, and we destroy the digital economy. And we, you know, I mean, look, we are all moving our businesses online, and our lives online, and our communities online. So of course the criminals are following. The police have got to help industry to get better at policing that. And the second thing they can do is help us with the public awareness. Because at the moment you do have people being scammed, and you do have companies which aren't adequately protecting themselves. And actually we're talking quite a lot to smaller businesses right now about how we can perhaps help to educate and inform them. Because unlike us, they're not fortunate enough to have relationships with GCHQ and be doing 10 steps to cybersecurity. So they are very vulnerable. And then I think the third part, genuinely, I think we need a new regulatory framework for this. I think we just need to be really honest about what we're facing here, tell the public the truth about it, and regulate it properly. And Ofcom presumably can't be the only regulator involved in this, right? Because Ofcom just speaks to the communications industry, so would not cover, say, banks who are regulated by the FCA and the PRA. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, you know, the ICO is you know, that's the Information Commissioner. So because we're talking about data here, they are the ultimate regulator. So I think, you know, they need to be given much wider powers. I mean, you know, you might think it's ironic that I say this, but we don't think that the fines they can give are large enough. You know, we actually think they should be significantly increased. The powers of the ICO should be significantly increased. And the legislation which supports those powers needs to be broadened also. Okay. That's it from me in terms of questions, but I'm sure there must be a lot of questions in the room given just the very interesting nature of what you've talked about and clearly the high profile nature of the attack. Does anyone have a question? If so, just raise your hand, and if you could just say before you speak where your name and sort of where you're coming from, as it were.
Hello, my name is Arantxa Sanchez. I am the CIO for Santander. And Jessica, I am personally delighted to say hello, because that night was a very long night for me as well. Actually, it was the first time I ended up reporting to my board an incident that was not produced by me. But a bit more seriously, it's a kind of reflection and highlighting again the importance of collaboration. We realized immediately that your customers could be our customers as well. So in very few hours, we put in place a protocol to protect fraud and so on, those customers. So once again, for me, was a kind of wake-up call. It's not only the importance of collaboration within, in my case, the financial services industry, but as well across industries. Do you have any reflection about this?
Thank you so much for that question, actually, because I should say, one of the benefits actually of going public with all of this was that we were able to work with the banks and with Santander and also with the credit checking agencies. So we gave all our customers 1 year's free credit checking with Nodal. And actually, that sort of collaboration has genuinely helped to keep customers safe. So it is extremely important. There are plenty of others as well. So, given the nature of the data that might be taken, think about what's in your wallet. This is the equivalent of your wallet being taken. Do you have a gym membership in there? Do you have, personal data about your home address in there? There are this cross, where you keep your car, your driving license details. This is all data held online. So actually, you're right. This has got to be a completely cross-industry collaboration. But financial services, was one of the first ports of call for us for obvious reasons. And, the banks responded fantastically, not least because, you guys have been under threat from cyber criminals from day one because of the nature of the data that you hold. And actually, I think that you guys have done a fantastic job at getting out there with the public information message in a way that lots of other industries haven't. And I think we share a membership of Get Safe Online, which is the sort of primary public-private charity which helps to inform the country and fight cybercrime. And I know they've done a huge amount of work trying to bring in other industries, and we're very passionate now about that too. Insurance obviously is going to become, from their comments this week, a big one. But I would say this is something that all industries need to work together on.
So another question? It's in the middle of the room there.
Richard Priest from OCAS. First of all, my own personal relationship to the TalkTalk hack was I ran the first national cybercrime exercise for the National Cybercrime Unit the week before the TalkTalk attack. And in fact, the senior investigating officer who made the first arrest in Northern Ireland was on that exercise and had done a SQL injection scenario as part of that. So hopefully that helped. The thing I'd really like to pick up on, though, is the issue of trust. And in the digital age, trust is changing. And what do we mean and understand by trust? And I think TalkTalk have led the way in a new honesty and transparency to develop that trust. You went through some of the things that the government can do, but commercially, it's probably the thing that most is on the mind of senior executives and board members. How do I maintain and enhance my reputation whilst at the same time build trust and create a different conversation, a different level of expectations? Could you just explore that a little bit more, please?
Well, thank you very much for the question. So, I think the way that we looked at this is it's a short-term, potentially short-term gain versus a long-term gain. So in the short term, the instinct, of course, is, well, how do we manage this crisis most effectively? We make it go away. And I think that just the acceptance that actually it's not going to go away is quite important. So one of the things that we were told quite definitively by the security services, which helped clarify our thinking, was this data is probably not coming back. If you've had a hack and you've received a ransom note, don't believe that by paying it, you're going to get the data back. That's almost certainly not true. It will be sold, it will be gone. And the reality is that should that guy get caught, it's all going to come out at the trial. Should that guy do another hack? And actually, he's responsible for your company too. It's going to come out in that trial. So companies understanding that actually doing the right thing turns out actually to be the right thing for your company in this scenario. I think that's really important. Planning for it in advance. So not being faced with the dilemma that we were faced with, where you debate what you would do in this scenario. I think actually this is the sort of thing that a board wants to get ahead of and actually make themselves comfortable that they would actually go and tell their customers. And then everything else flows from that, which relationships you would need in order to do that, how you would communicate it to customers, the sorts of channels you'd use. I think the clearer you can be and the more efficient you can be and the more transparent you can be with customers, the better. And I think a lot of that comes down to preparedness. But look, the main thing is we have to do this together. It can't just be outliers like TalkTalk, because half the world thinks we're a shining example, the other half thinks we're a horrible warning. And I think we all need to get a bit more comfortable about the fact that this affects everybody.
Any other questions? There's one right at the very back of the room. on the back wall.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your presentation today. I just have one question in relation to your comments on the difference between the business and the cybersecurity function traditionally, especially when it comes to communication and things of that nature. Has that changed now as a result of this incident at TalkTalk? And how has that changed from a business focus for cybersecurity?
Thank you. That's a really good question. So I think what we had before was, look, we're a large-scale business dealing with critical infrastructure, as I said. So we had a beefy security function. But actually, was that security function integrated with all the other teams? So were we thinking about security when we made a product development decision, when we made a comms decision? Not in the way that we are now, actually. So the first thing is making sure that that function is really integrated across the company and that those thought processes are integrated across the company. Secondly, as I said, we are spending more and more on cybersecurity, and this has been a big wake-up call for us about the scale of the problem. So as you'd imagine, we're spending more, we're recruiting more, and the nature of the conversations that they're having in the board meetings are changing. So look, this was discussed at every board meeting. It's in the minutes of every board meeting. But if you were to compare the way the conversations are taking place and what I think was quite an apparent asymmetry of understanding and information to the conversations that are happening now, what you can see is the business's appetite for risk has completely changed. It simply has. I mean, TalkTalk is a glorious startup culture. It is a business of innovators and pioneers. And that's one of the things that's made us great. And it's one of the wonderful things about working there. And it's one of the reasons we've delivered again and again disruptive, positive innovation for our customers. However, if you were to ask the company now, is innovation more important than process? The answer that will come back is absolutely not. Are we going to look at risk very, very seriously now before we try to do anything? Yes, we absolutely are. So whilst we're still going to hero the pioneers, the settlers in the company have been absolutely raised up now and are integrated into all our business decisions.
Thanks. And just one final question from me. Obviously, at some point, there will be a trial related to the hackers. How will you deal with that? Obviously, back in the headlines, everything will be raked up again. How will you deal with that? You won't be able to say very much while the criminal trial goes on. I know you can't say that much now, but how do you plan to do that?
So I think, our role here was to protect customers. What the police does, we've cooperated with the police to the greatest extent that we possibly can. Obviously, we don't want these guys out there being able to do any more harm to customers, but the rest is really out of our hands at this point. We'll keep doing what we're doing, which is being open and honest, and hopefully the police will handle the rest.
Okay. Jessica, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks.